Okay, well, I'm finding that the more that I kind of just let myself talk, the more that I seem to think of different discussion topics. Um, so I kind of want to connect this to what I was talking about before, which is like the fragment itself, the ironic self that some of us on the internet are so used to. Like, it's sort of a performative personality, but it masks the selves that we're afraid to show or don't feel safe enough to show, but yet still having the desire to be seen causes us to obfuscate ourselves, and then put that obfuscated fragment itself out there, and then we inevitably become known as that self, which creates a divide even greater between ourselves and the world. And yet, all the while, the fragment itself is all that's able to be shown. The work, perhaps the self-acceptance, the bridge between the self and the world is incomplete. It's not efficient. Anyone who travels it will be fraught with difficulty. And they do so at their own peril because we're the ones who constructed it, right? We're the constructors of our own bridge between ourselves and the world. Nobody can do that for us. They can perhaps take what we've constructed and improve on it, make it easier for the connection to be made. But the fact is that we create the bridge ourselves, and without much external input, that's not always the best way to go about it. And I wonder to the extent that this phenomena was kind of present throughout history. Like, I feel like writers would be the most susceptible to that, because informing their own worlds with language, the interpretation is left largely to the reader. And yet, people like that would still have correspondences. They'd still have somewhat regular, like normal interactions with the world. So they would still be seen and observed plentifully. But now on the internet, that's largely dominated by text communication. There's a lot of authenticity that's lost because we're not directly interacting with the world. We're not striving to be authentic selves. And yet sometimes when we find that it's rejected, painfully so in a lot of ways. So for some people, that drives them deeper into their sense of ironic self-detachment. Tire, South America. And personally for myself, I've been kind of experimenting with authenticity lately, at least on the internet. Because I feel that in person, mean, I don't try and present a different personality than what I have, but there's a lot that's lost. And frustration is not uncommon. If you put yourself in a position for too long where you're not perceived as you feel you should or want to be perceived, and the friction builds up and withdrawal happens. And so the ironic self, ironically, is both extremely authentic and extremely inauthentic, all the while extremely fragile, because it's managing the tension between the self and the world. It's not created to bridge the gap so much. Well, it is, but it doesn't permit of further exploration. It only permits of what it allows itself to permit. Whereas like natural human connection is a lot more free. It's a lot less like intellectualized. Yeah, we'll just go Africa. Don't see any weird anthills, but we do see this red dirt and some people over there who could be ethnically African. Makes sense. Oh, for once, one of those guesses actually paid off. I guess for me too, this is also a way of like testing what I think I can deduce about the world versus what I actually can. And so like at a glance, anyone would be able to identify these features as either familiar or unfamiliar. And that's a start, because we base it on our intuition, on what we've already seen. We form sort of a hierarchy of categories, smallest to largest, of things in the world. But it breaks down in the finer details. And it also breaks down just like well, in general, it just breaks down under greater scrutiny. And I guess too much scrutiny also kind of leads to hyper-specialization in terms of the relation of self to world, because it's very true that ironic self-detachment carries with it like a very judgmental core, whether towards oneself, towards others. I guess in most cases both, because you wouldn't feel the need to hide yourself if you were if you didn't feel you highly scrutinized yourself and that there was something less than or something inferior that you didn't want others to see. Yeah, I won't think too much about this. We'll go Africa again and try not to place it in the south, simply because we've seen it in the south, but maybe it is Zimbabwe. More north, Kenya. Okay. So really the increased scrutiny acts as a filter both for intaking the world and for putting it out. Brunswick? Where the fuck is Brunswick? Wait. Virginia, Carolina, Holden Street. And the filter of scrutiny tells us what's acceptable, what's unacceptable, but I find that it's most largely applied to like emotional expression, personal freedom. It informs the tension I mentioned earlier. This supports it. Because as long as there is scrutiny, too much scrutiny, less acceptance, there's going to be that tension. Oh, this is Australian. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Where's Brunswick? So trying to overcome that scrutiny, it's kind of like one of the hardest things I feel like I've ever done in my life. And I'm very bad at it. I'm good at accepting others for who they are, but transmitting myself across that bridge is extremely difficult. And that's partly because I scrutinize myself way too much to where I feel like my flaws are obvious to others. And I guess everyone feels that way, especially people who are very anxious or depressed, maybe. They feel like their flaws are broadcast to the world and they become afraid of being observed and seen. But if you have that kind of neurosis, you're not necessarily, you're hiding yourself physically, but I don't feel like you're hiding yourself psychologically too much or socially. Maybe there's kind of the giving too much of yourself as an anxious thing. And then that creates an imbalance. And it could impinge on others. But scrutiny is kind of fundamental in both cases. So I also mentioned like kind of the initial exhibitionism that has to be overcome, or maybe indulged in more of putting yourself out there. So that carries with it the risk of being hurt. And I feel like the ironic attachment is most afraid of being hurt. It's afraid of being found out. It's afraid of a self, perhaps an undesirable or devalued self, being disclosed. And self-disclosure is really terrifying. It feels like the only thing you have is yourself. And so if that's exposed to the world, then anyone else is kind of free to modify that self. And especially if you're not too self-assured, if you're kind of uncertain of yourself, you might be more inclined to project something that you want to be yourself and you want others to see you as. I'll just go here. Oops. Not too far away. And it's funny, whenever I'm on like normie social media like Facebook or something, it doesn't seem necessary to craft an ironic self. Because one, it won't even be understood. It'll be misinterpreted almost universally. If you're in a space with others who are as like insecure and judgmental as yourself, then the ironic self is a protection. But it's also like a rite of passage. It's the way that you've learned to interact with others who are kind of like at your caliber, meaning that they are also as judgmental as you, but you feel a kinship in that your mutual neuroses creates a kinship that you try to connect over, despite the differences, despite the hedgehog dilemma. The closer you get, the more you hurt each other. But on like Facebook and stuff, I don't try to be like that because I have the sense that it's not necessary. There's really no need. But I do present a self that is still idealized. It's just not one that I feel is like fragmented. It feels like an authentic self that I don't get to express much. Or perhaps I only express to like close friends and family, which would be ironic that I would show that to the public. But I would rather show that to the public than to a group of ironic people on the internet who would tear you apart instantly. Well, not necessarily. I mean, I always am as authentic as possible in those kinds of spaces too. Like, the ironic self-detachment is, for me, it's highly performative, and I don't prefer it at all. And it leads to like kind of the terminally online mentality that you would see in like hardcore chat rooms or something, or like heavily ritualized in-group spaces where there's like a language, a dialect, is a way of socialization to be learned. Like on 4chan, you shouldn't be afraid of being authentic on 4chan, but you should also be aware that if you are, then you're basically giving yourself, you're basically putting a target on your back. And so once that's there and people get their first taste of like what it's like to actually be scrutinized so heavily, to be thought about in ways that could be like just ridiculous, sometimes like grotesque and highly inaccurate, it challenges your sense of self. It challenges like sort of who you thought you were, or the stories that you've been telling yourself, which is why a lot of people don't go there, simply because it's not worthwhile to them. But yeah, when I was younger, I thought it was like cool, like hip, like to sort of fit in with the internet weirdos who do have their own language. They have their own like sort of Lord of the Flies type social structure, where if you can't banter, you can't hang. If you're not quick-witted, if you're not sardonic, if you can't like navigate language efficiently enough, you basically get eaten alive. I thought those were cool places, and I have yet always felt like a dissonance trying to fit into that, because it's not really authentic. The fuck are we? Miles. We're in a zone with Miles, Tennessee. Minnesota. No, North Dakota. So I guess in my case, I'm fragmented between sort of ironic detachment, but also authenticity. I don't enjoy seeing people tear each other down unless it's in good, unless it's on mutual terms, unless it's friendly banter, it's not destructive banter. You're not trying to actually make someone feel bad. It's more an expression of how well you know them, that you can conjecture about them in like a satirical way. Because that is endearment. That's like a form of intimacy. And that's appreciated. But without that familiarity, it's unwelcome and unnecessary and just kind of gross. I want to say Northern Europe. Somewhere in a hillside. We have contrails. Do they have those in Europe? Are they making the frogs gay in Europe, or is that just us? Maine? Maybe? I don't know. Denmark? You see these kind of like compact cars, or were these more normal sized? What about this? What is that? These are really beautiful houses though. Damn. Okay, somewhere by water, next to a bigger city. Got some scooters just sitting around. Den Norsk Aktoren. That's the Norwegian flag, right? Well, we'll find out. And it would be by water. Oslo? Somewhere near Oslo? Ah, that water. Okay. But I guess the whole point of this really was that fragmenting yourself is not the way to go. And I think that self-detachment has to be broken in any way, shape, or form. There has to be even a single connection from the outside world to your authentic self. Otherwise, you will have no confidence. You will have no assurance that you can be understood, or that you can be helped, or that you can build like authentic relationships, which is what everyone strives for, just sometimes in like damaged ways. Oh, it's a lowercase sign. It's so hip. It's so Twitter. Mountain ash. Fuck it, we'll see a street. Pin oak. Could this be Canadian? Excuse me. No, we'll say. Oh, okay. Alright, I guess I'll do 2 more of these. Call it a day on these videos. Somewhere in Italy. Just take that. Just take it. Your last one, closing remarks. I think I said that earlier. Again, we're looking at a wall of rocks. It seems British. Hay bales. Yeah, I'll throw this in somewhere over here. Now, do we go east or west? Let's go Wales. Oh, Scotland. Alright, well, that does it for me. Hopefully I don't just fill up my YouTube channel with a bunch of these videos. But then again, why wouldn't I? It's an avenue for discussion, and it's fun as well. So yeah.